A video for a T5 transmission, world class 85 to 93. Actually, the same transmission was used in the V6 Mustangs all the way up until 2001, and can actually be converted to the shorter Fox style input shaft pretty easily. Anyhow, I'll be showing all the tips and tricks that I've learned. I've done at least a couple hundred of these things over the last 10 years, so I have some pretty hefty experience. This is the neutral safety sensor, 7/8 wrench required to remove that, and inside you'll find a pin. Often the builders will leave that pin out when they build it, and it's not a huge deal, but what it does do is kick the throttle off when you step on the clutch when you're on cruising, and it also when you cruise control, and it also to check codes, your transmission has to be neutral. Make sure that you're not in gear. That's what that does. Anyway, I just use a magnet to remove that. For the bolts to the lid, we'll be using 10mm. For this and all these, 15. This is a 13, although a half will work. And when you take the shifter off, there should be a plastic cup. Usually it stays inside here. For this, you need a punch to remove that. You just drive that pin straight down. I'll show you in a few minutes. Here you go, Katie. You're on YouTube. You get to be my assistant for today. Okay, you want to make sure to record what I'm doing. Okay, now I'm using set punch. The first step that you're going to do is you're going to take this little pin in here, and you're making sure the transmission is in neutral. Drive it down till it bottoms out. That's it. Okay, so then after that, this goes much further if you do it this way. Just take out your case bolts. It should come out pretty easy. I've seen times where people over-torque the crap out of them, but generally they come out pretty easy. Then when you're done with that, grab your 10 and remove all the lid bolts. Get this thing stripped down in less than 5 minutes. Transmissions are pretty simple. If you've never built one before, this is the best place to start. I've had some people start off with a T56 for their first transmission. And while those aren't the most complicated thing in the world for a first timer, they're definitely not easy. So once you've removed all these, man, I should have cleaned the case first. This thing is awfully greasy. That's it. So once you've removed all these 10mm bolts, grab yourself a hammer. And just give it a couple whacks. Now, to remove the tail housing, shine the light up here please, Kate. You're going to want to pull this block back a little bit. You can zoom out a little bit so you can see more, okay? So, just kind of pull backwards on it like that. And after you do that, you can wiggle the case. Then you got to keep wiggling on this block as you pull out on the case. Okay? Then it'll come out. 3 pieces, the block, the spring, that pin that you punch down, and the check ball.
That's 4.
Forgot I count. Okay, there goes all the fluid. You're running gear oil in this. That's the wrong stuff to run. Gear oil destroys your transmission. Okay, so after it spills all over your table, it's to be expected. These things will never quite get emptied completely. Anyway, here is the speedometer gear. That's the yellow one. That'll work from factory 273s all the way up to 373s. They also have a green one that came in 1990 and up, I believe. And that one only goes to 323s, I think. And then they have a black one, which will take you all the way to like 430s. After that's done, just shove something. There's a place right here to pry.
Sounds disgusting.
That's just the sound of the silicone breaking free. There's also another spot back here. So you're going to pull it. Make sure that you're back far enough so you can get the whole transmission in. Thanks. Pull it up and off at an angle like that. When this is off, you want to inspect the forks. They don't bend because they're made out of cast aluminum, but they will break. Not usually. I've had maybe 1 or 2 in my whole life out of a couple hundred that have broken. These plastic shift fork tabs constantly break. They are available at brass. I've seen them on the internet for sale. Usually I put the plastic ones in there. Usually they'll last a long time. Anyway, this looks good. There's no cracks on the forks. Sometimes when these will break, you'll see that it'll significantly wear down the clutch fork from riding on the slider without a pad. This looks pretty good. If you have to take it apart, though, there's a pin right here, another punch pin, and you simply drive that punch pin down, and once that punch pin comes down, it'll all come apart so you can swap out your forks. The next step that I like to do, well, let's go ahead and pull this front plate off. Press pause. I gotta look for something.
Start.
No, just press pause again.
Yeah,
Let's just
I
start
know.
recording. Okay. So, remove the 4 bolts. This particular transmission, they claimed was grinding in 4th gear and 2nd gear. So it sounds like your typical Synchro. Long mile, lots of miles. Put a cloth over this, whatever to protect it. Just like that. Now this one has the upgraded cast iron. Some call it steel, but it's cast iron. Bearing retainer. These are better than the steel ones because the steel ones are actually of a 2-piece design. This is the steel and aluminum one people use. It's a steel sleeve pressed into an aluminum base, and this will actually separate. This is a 1-piece cast iron. Beautiful piece. It's what Ford should have used from the factory. In fact, they did on some other cars, but not this transmission. These can be had, I find them all the time on eBay, but on Summit Racing you can pick these up for cheap. It's like 18 bucks for one of these, and these things are wonderful. So, for this, I found the best trick is to stick something under the tail housing, elevate the tail housing, okay? If you don't elevate the tail housing, what happens is you can drop all of your pins into here. Not a big deal if you got the lid off, but if you're just trying to swap the input shaft with the lid on and you drop the pins in, then you're screwed. Rotate and pull is what you're going to do. Okay, rotate and pull gently. You'll feel it start to give when you do. Just be very slow. Okay, I could have elevated it up more, but oh boy. Here's the guy's whining noise. He complained it was whining. Want to inspect the inside of this. You probably won't be able to see it, but just make sure your bearing surface in here is all good. I've only seen one circumstance where it wasn't. Then you check the dog teeth to make sure they're sharp houses, so to speak, pointy houses. And the next thing you're going to check is on the teeth themselves. And you may not be able to see this, but basically you're going to look on the teeth, and you can use something with a very fine point to feel. You want to feel for any ridges. You'll sometimes see a line. If you have a transmission that's whining first, second, third, goes away in fourth, 99% of the time it's not a bearing. It's your cluster and input shaft that's worn on these teeth, and you'll pull it apart and you'll see a wear line in here and on the cluster shaft itself. This one looks good. So the whining noise was the bearings, which I'll show you in a minute. Sometimes you can see, and you pull it apart, and it will have a little line or a little bit of wear on the teeth. Now, that's where it's crucial to ask the customer or yourself before you pull it apart, was the transmission making noise? If the transmission was not making noise and it has just a little ridge on it, you're good to reuse it. You know, it wasn't causing problems before. Here's the bearings that came out of the inside. I don't know if you can see that or not, but they're chewed up. Really chewed up. Can you see that all in there? Yeah, my camera's really bad. Take my word for it. They're bad. And here's what happens. See if you can shine it in here, Kate. This whole input shaft right here, can you see that? Let's see. Is all screwed up. Here, let me see. Just completely chewed up. Yeah, you can see that. That's typical. Happens on, I'd say, 1 out of 3 transmissions, maybe even 1 out of 2 that I pull apart, unfortunately. So, main shafts are really expensive. However, if you find a transmission shop that's local, they can actually, a transmission supplier shop, they can actually retip these things. And my place charges only $75 to retip this. So it's not a big deal. You don't need to go out and spend $1 million on a new main shaft. God, the video quality on this thing is horrible. I have to apologize for that. I said, so finding a place that could retip that is going to be your best bet. Otherwise, you're going to pay a lot of money. So anyway, on the inside, there's several things that come apart. Okay. Flat washer goes on first. Behind the flat washer, this went on, right? The bearing. And then the Synchro went in back of it. Now you can see this Synchro is the newer carbon fiber style Synchro. If it was the older style, which you still come across, it's kind of lined with more of a paper type cardboard looking material. It's not cardboard, but that's what it looks like. Brand new 3rd gear and 4th gear Synchro, mics out to 228 thousandths. Okay? This one is 201 thousandths. This one is severely worn. That's how you know that that's bad. Okay? Usually you get away if it's 226 thousandths, but once you start getting even below that, I don't like to reuse it. Now, when you see something like that, check the teeth where the Synchro engages on the gear. This one's still good. Slight wear, but nothing to be concerned about. So, definitely needs a Synchro kit. The other way you're supposed to be able to tell, if you can put it on the actual cone, like this. Okay, you're supposed to be able to use a spacer or a shim or whatever. Not a shim, but a feeler gauge, right? And there's supposed to be a gap, kind of like that. That's what it's supposed to look like. This one sits flat. That means all the clutch material is worn off of this thing. If it were good still, you would see a gap just like that, and it would not seat all the way against the actual gear. I prefer to use a feeler gauge because I get a more precise measurement out of it.
Now it is.
Now it is? Okay, cool. Next thing you're going to do, there's a punch right on top of this fork. Just going to drive it down. Hit your finger a few times. That's to be expected. I like to put my hand underneath it so that the pin doesn't go flying. I have all kinds of spares, but you probably will not. There it is, just another pin. Okay. Pull the punch back out. Next thing you're gonna find, you're gonna need some needle nose pliers, so when you squeeze them, they do that. There's a horseshoe clip right here. You're gonna put it in the holes on the clip, and you're just gonna squeeze and pull. Just like that. Okay? Now, when you're installing these things, I'll mention it later, there tends to be a side that's more rounded on the edges, like this one you might not be able to see, and then a side that's flatter. The side that's flatter always goes on the out. Okay? God, it's like 105 degrees out here. Now, when this is off, what I like to do here, okay, I like to gently tap on here. By gently tapping on here, usually it'll just pop off right here. Okay? If it's being stubborn, sometimes you can take something and put it behind 5th gear and pull 5th gear like that. Don't get it on the teeth, you don't want to break your tooth. Okay? Anyway, that way you can pull it apart without it coming apart. Okay? So then you're going to check once again your engagement teeth. This one's almost always fine. You know, this is where it fit. That looks absolutely perfect. That's good. Okay? Don't lose any parts. Okay, here's the 5th gear Synchro. Okay, you can see how there's a gap there, like I told you there should be. This Synchro's still good. Now check 5th gear, dog teeth. This one looks fantastic. Often I get a lot of speed racers who think that 5th gear power shifts on the freeway are ideal, and you'll see the 5th gear is completely worn down and you have to replace it, which is a bummer because these tend to be very expensive. Okay, so this just kind of pops out and go like that and wiggle a little bit, it'll just fall out. Okay, now you're going to see this on a lot of transmissions. You can throw that away. That's from the factory. What they do is they put it in from the factory right there, fill it up with fluid. That way, when it goes down the line, the fluid doesn't dump out the tail shaft before the transmission dry shaft is put in, right? And then when they put the dry shaft in, it just shoves that all the way back in. Not needed. You're going to take and lift this up at an angle, grab the input shaft, I'm sorry, the tip, and you're just going to lift it straight up and out at an angle. Just like that. Okay, on the 5th fork, I forgot to tell you, once again, you're going to check the plastic tabs. Mine actually aren't that bad. It would appear that this transmission, the main problem is the worn tip from the bearings and the Synchros. Get you another angle at this tip. There you go. Now you can really see how worn that is. I wonder if I have a good one around here. Here we go. It's a T56. Oh, here we go. Here's a T5. That's how it's supposed to look. Actually, that one's got a little bit of pitting on it too. I'm not going to reuse that one, but that's closer to how it should look. Now you're going to come in here, grab this. Almost no play. They don't really make enough shims for this anymore. I'm fortunate enough to be doing this for a long time, and I got all kinds of them. Sometimes it's not possible to shim this to perfection. I'll get over that later. Plastic funnel goes in there. Sounds good, spins free. Now, when you're building a transmission, I'll be honest, bearings typically last almost the lifetime of the car, except for those on the end. You can usually get away with just doing a Synchro swap and reusing all the bearings. You know, you inspect them. I've done that many times. Now, on here, you're going to have on the Mustang transmissions, you're going to see a 0.5 or an 052 or probably an 068. Those are the factory ones. The 052 is the 85 to 89 transmissions. They all had 335 first gear ratio throughout the life of them, unless you had a T5Z, which is the Ford Racing factory version. That was a 295. But anyway, the factory versions were all 335, but the 85 to 89 with the 052 were slightly weaker, and the 068 were stronger, but they do have different internal gears, so you have to count everything. Now, the teeth-wise. Okay, now on here, this looks really good. Okay, but you're going to look once again on the inside of the teeth for any kind of wear, because when it wears, that's what creates your backlash, which is your extra space between the gears, and that's what'll create your whining. Make sure there's no broken teeth on any of these. That's the reverse. I have seen those come in completely gone from people grinding the snot out of reverse. Then they lose reverse, and that gets completely ground up. To remove this, you're going to need a T40 Torx bit. Okay, it's not that difficult. We'll get there in a few minutes.